In 1974, a small group of friends went out into the plains of Texas, and what they found there would not only change their lives, but the landscape of horror forever. Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chain Saw Massacre is one of the defining pieces of modern film horror, a story that courted controversy when it was first released, but was also met with widespread success. A movie simultaneously derided for its gruesome exploitation cinema and praised for its technical ability to shock and terrify. Its story is simple. A group of 5 friends drive out into the middle of Texas to investigate reports of grave robbing, but they're soon caught in the clutches of a cannibalistic family who picks them off one by one. The reasons why are unimportant. In fact, it's all rather arbitrary, a matter of simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the question of who will survive and what will be left of them isn't just a matter of life and limb, but a matter of sanity in the face of gruesome, unflinching madness. As a film, Massacre stands as a dividing line within the landscape of horror. You can make a case that there's simply horror before Hooper's movie, and there's horror after. Of course, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre is largely responsible for the creation of the slasher subgenre, which has elements that can be found in early progenitors like Psycho and Peeping Tom, and that were eventually solidified by Halloween. In doing so, the modern movie monster was also redefined. Rather than the romantic notions of Frankenstein's monster or the inhuman horrors of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, audiences were suddenly terrorized by the simultaneously more and less human killers of Leatherface, Michael Myers, and Jason Voorhees. Men compelled to kill out of some exaggerated and often problematically portrayed psychosis, and representing the worst of humanity. But in being a low-budget exploitation film made before the solidification of the subgenre, and without guidance from anyone other than Hooper and co-writer Kim Henkel, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre stands as an unhinged, raw dose of shrieking terror that still manages to shock audiences today. From its ultra-low-budget filming to its many blood-splattered metaphors to its long-lasting impact, we'll see how one terrifying trip into the Texas heartland redefined horror forever. By the early 1970s, Tobe Hooper had found regular work as a college professor and a documentary cameraman, with only one extremely low-budget film, Eggshells, under his belt. But Hooper, who hadn't lost interest in feature filmmaking, was soon inspired to write a horror film after a Christmas shopping trip, where he imagined using a chainsaw to carve his way out of a claustrophobic crowd, and being bombarded by endless waves of graphic nightly news coverage that he cited as showing brains spilled all over the road. This vicariously traumatic news coverage also drew Hooper's attention to several infamous serial killers, specifically Texan killer Elmer Wayne Henley and the trophy-taking Ed Gein. But Hooper also intended to make a film that expressed his anger toward his country. The filmmaker had grown increasingly disillusioned with the United States over the Vietnam War, Watergate, and the 1973 oil crisis, which all formed together in a greater anger toward the socio-political issues embroiling the US, and the feeling of being lied to over and over again by both the government and the media. Hooper's draft was soon rewritten with collaborator Kim Henkel, and after a cast of actors was pulled from the local Austin scene, the film's production was off and running. Over the course of a 31-day shoot that ran 7 days a week and often up to 18 hours a day, in the middle of a humid Texas summer where temperatures often reached over 100, Hooper and company crafted their film. And the horror stories of the making of this horror story are legendary. If watching the Texas Chain Saw Massacre gives you the impression of a movie as psychotic in its production as its story, it wouldn't be far from the truth. Real animal bones filled the house of its killers. Fresh roadkill was picked off nearby highways for use. A finger was sliced open for real when the prop knife's fake blood wouldn't work. Actors were left bruised and sore from on-screen attacks that veered dangerously close to reality. And the sweltering heat mixed with aging dead meat sent cast and crew running to faint or puke between takes. It wouldn't be a surprise if I told you that nearly everyone hated Hooper by the end of the film shoot, and most would never work with him again. The result is a film that you can nearly smell. a blistering Texas wasteland so hot you can feel it coming off the screen. But Hooper and crew were hoping to turn a cheap shoot into exploitation gold, and they got it. Massacre, with its shoestring budget and general disinterest in characters, plot, or really anything other than its primal thrills, falls directly into the category of exploitation cinema. Cheap films that seek to make a profit by taking niche subjects and taboo topics, and then almost daring audiences to see them. In doing so, TCM has no pretenses about what it's trying to say or how it's trying to say it. And the effect is still disturbing today. There's a willingness to stare straight into the unblinking eye of madness and have no answers for what's found there. Instead, we're simply left with the aftermath and sent back out, reeling and dazed, into a world that Hooper and company have reframed for us. I kind of wanted it to be a documentary, said Hooper. What we were seeing versus the creation of a reality we were living in. A San Antonio TV station was sponsored by a beer company, and their 6 o'clock news is truly ghastly. And everyone was tuning in. These were the people with the cameras who stopped on I-35 to get close-ups when things went all crashing bad. Of course, that leering tendency that humans have in wanting to see the aftermath of the worst news imaginable is exactly what attracted them to Massacre, which was advertised as being a true story. Massacre eventually debuted on October 11th, 1974 to near immediate controversy and dismissal by many critics as debased, almost pornographic exploitation. But the luridness of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, combined with an annual re-release into theaters for 8 years in a row, netted more than $30 million on a $140,000 budget, making it the most profitable independent film until John Carpenter's Halloween. What's crucial in considering the interconnectedness of Massacre's shoestring budget filmmaking and its aesthetic quality is that simply making a movie with no money and treating your cast and crew terribly is not the path to filmmaking genius. Massacre's aesthetics have been cited as not only influencing the slasher subgenre, but also playing a clear role in defining the horror of films like Alien and The Hills Have Eyes, each hyper-influential in their own right. And the DIY low-budget production inspired Sam Raimi's similar ramshackle creation of The Evil Dead. But the sheer volume of terrible, immediately forgotten horror movies that had zero budget and even less talent clearly illustrate that low-budget indie horror does not automatically equal genius. In the years that followed its debut, Massacre continued to polarize, being bought by the Museum of Modern Art for its permanent collection, banned in the United Kingdom for decades as one of its many video nasties, selected for the 1975 Cannes Film Festival, and having its release in many countries delayed for decades due to the shocking reputation it had gained. Massacre is known first and foremost for being transgressive in its gruesomeness, an almost bald-faced taunt to the normies to come check out something truly made by a bunch of dang-ass freaks. But while Massacre is horrifying on its surface, Hooper and Henkel designed their low-budget horror to sneak in many different critiques of American society as they saw it at the time.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths.
The opening of TCM places its viewers in a unique headspace, claiming that what follows are true events, and memorializing its characters and the tragedy that befell them. The effect is that Hooper and company are breaking down the dividing line of fiction within their story to entice further shocks at the film's killings. It's, of course, not true. The real-life serial killer influences are there, but there's nothing in this film actually related to reality. It's just Hooper's jabs at being lied to by the government. However, a natural starkness is immediately established by the first images we see. Camera bulb flashes documenting and obscuring a horrific scene until a profane piece of corpse art is revealed. The boiled flesh and yellow sky establish the putrid heat and taboo nature of our film immediately. And this is just the first of much flesh to come. There's a fixation on dead bodies in this film, an unflinching examination of death and decay which soon gives way to meat and consumption.
Franklin, I like meat. Please change the subject.
The result is that as viewers, we're forced to examine what the difference is between natural death we respect as sacred and unnatural death we commodify for food. The slaughterhouse scene early in the film is replaced by the slaughterhouse of Leatherface and family. Cow meat replaced by human meat, but the methods remain the same. The gang's early encounter with the hitchhiker and his frank discussion of slaughtering and meat rendering is disturbing because of the pleasure taken in it. But isn't it all true? One by one, the main cast of Hooper's film are inextricably drawn to Leatherface's house of their own accord. There's no persuasion, no false promises. They simply find and enter the clearly very creepy-looking rundown home and find their brutal deaths within. It's as if each victim is on a conveyor belt, underlining their relation to cows and slaughterhouses. And like them, they're treated as meat for the family. While there's no process shown in detail, besides Leatherface beginning to hack up one victim with a chainsaw, later shots of sausages and roasting barbecue draw the clear line between them in our minds, because the rending and tearing process has been so clearly described earlier.
And they scrape all the flesh away from the bone,
just without knowing what it will be applied to later. This drawing together of man and animal through the indifference of meathood turns Texas Chain Saw Massacre into one of the most pro-vegetarian films in cinema history, perhaps only rivaled by George Miller and Chris Noonan's Babe, which underlines its message with empathy rather than disgust.
That'll do, pig. That'll do.
Like the clear relation between these slasher villains and the film's anti-meat ideas, a viewer only has to dig a little deeper to see these themes playing host to further metaphors. Alongside this slaughterhouse vibe comes the clashing of capitalism and the hippie movement, with the demands created by one literally devouring the other. Early on, we find out that the Sawyer family, a name only solidified in part 2, get it? Sawyer, was driven out of their jobs at the slaughterhouse by automation and rapid capitalistic growth. This all adds to the sense of desperation giving birth to insanity that motivates this cannibal family. There's no jobs, no gas for the station, no way forward. So, in turn, the family devours anything it can get its hands on. They're a family unit that is struggling to survive, to maintain or to cling to the world that they have known, said Henkel. The social environment in which things are changing, in which the foundations of the world that are familiar to them are slipping away. The question is, what can we do as a social unit to maintain our life? Given that our killers are a corruption of the idealized American nuclear family, the cook playing father, Leatherface playing mother, and the hitchhiker playing son, Hooper's film turns the civilized American dream into a vicious nightmare. This satirical disillusionment in America runs throughout Hooper's filmography in movies like Salem's Lot, Poltergeist, and even Invaders from Mars. But it all began much earlier in Hooper's life. On August 1st, 1966, a young Hooper was at the University of Texas when Charles Whitman began shooting from the campus tower with a rifle. Over the next 96 minutes, Whitman killed 15 people and injured another 31, including a cop that was mere feet away from Hooper. The attack was, at the time, the deadliest mass shooting by a lone gunman in the United States, and came in the midst of the counterculture hippie movement that defined the decade for many. The stark contrast between a movement preaching peace and love and the inexplicable violence possible at any moment in the United States is embodied in how our hippie-coded victims willfully walk into their deaths, refusing to believe that anyone could want to do them harm, even when the Sawyer home practically screams serial killer. The contrast highlights the polarity of American society, the rural family versus the urban individual. Of course, in this light, the rural family is made out to be insane cannibals, but the extremely heightened abnormal insanity of the Sawyers keeps these depictions of mental health from feeling totally insensitive because of their surreality. This is, after all, a movie where a wheelchair-bound young man is viciously chainsawed to death. Sensitivity isn't anywhere near the ballpark here. What's crucial and often unexpected given its title is that Massacre is extremely light on gore. It's not like this is a pre-Splatterfest cinema world. It's post-Herschel Gordon Lewis after all. Instead, Hooper's thoughts of making the film far more graphic were prevented by a lack of budget and the director's hopes of getting a PG rating for better distribution. That didn't happen, of course. Massacre was originally given an X before being edited down to R. But the effect is that the exaggerated violence and special effects that horror fans like to revel in are replaced by a bluntness that feels way more real. A hammer hit to the head or an obscured hook in the back happen in mere moments, subconsciously persuading audiences to consider what the act would feel like on their own body, instead of being able to displace it on some dated-looking effect. Given Hooper's background as a documentary filmmaker, it's no surprise that there's a starkness to Massacre's cinematography, but there's an evolution to how the film is shot as the story progresses. The simplicity of early scenes, which feel like a camera being stuck in the middle of a van and separating our hippie heroes from their disturbing hitchhiker, is the film at its most passively observational. But this changes as the insanity behind it all is slowly uncovered as we reach our climax, which is filled with unconventional shot choices, huge close-ups, and tons of fast cuts to underline how our characters are losing their minds. The terror crafted here would live on through countless films molded by the Massacre. So, it's impossible to talk about the Texas Chain Saw Massacre without discussing its connection to the slasher subgenre that would take over the industry for much of the 1980s. But of course, I've already talked plenty about slashers in videos on Halloween, Halloween 2, and the unmade sequels within the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street franchises. So let's not repeat ourselves too much here. What's crucial in Massacre's role within horror is how the taboo ideas and stark killings that shocked audiences at its debut would soon become an incontrovertible part of mainstream horror. Author Carol J. Clover, in her seminal 1992 book Men, Women, and Chainsaws: Gender in the Modern Horror Film, credits Massacre with solidifying the elements of the slasher first composed by Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. They are a psychosexually propelled killer, a locale referred to as the Terrible Place that houses a history of evil, a signature weapon that is typically a type of blade quite phallic in imagery, a group of victims who trespass into the domain of the killer and are picked off one by one, with the women invariably given longer, lingering deaths, and the final girl, the sole survivor of the film, who is almost always a woman, and whose escape and defeat of the killer is most often due to luck rather than skill. These archetypes are continually recycled in the decades of film that follow, with Clover stating, "The fact is that horror movies look like nothing so much as folk tales, a set of fixed tale types that generate an endless stream of what are, in effect, variants, sequels, remakes, and rip-offs. This is a field in which there is, in some sense, no original, no real or right text, but only variants. A world in which, therefore, the meaning of the individual example lies outside itself." Post-Massacre, slasher films would up the gore, increase the body count, and make the psychosexual relation between killer and victims text rather than subtext. But the themes that made Massacre compelling and still frightening would recede in favor of cheap scares with little going on beneath the surface. But that's not to say that Leatherface and company were exempt from this trend. There have been a lot of sequels to Massacre, with only one being written and directed by Hooper, Texas Chain Saw Massacre 2 in 1986. But I can't say that any of them are really worth your time. Part 2 was made by Hooper more than a decade after the original and following several big budget failures, in an effort to regain some box office cachet. But 2 is a gross out black comedy, almost skewering the harshness of the original out of exasperation. The film would eventually be followed by 2 more sequels, each more misguided than the next. A remake and its prequel, a 3D sequel to the original, another unrelated prequel, and at the time of this video's publication, another sequel to the original set decades later. If it isn't obvious by now, it's that studios have been trying to make Texas Chainsaw into a franchise for decades, when it's clear that it has no true potential to be one. Leatherface may be included alongside Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, and Freddy Krueger in the halls of classic slasher villains, but the character doesn't draw its power from some iconic individualistic nature. Instead, he's part of the screaming madness of this original story, a lightning rod for the insanity at the center of it. Leatherface is both victimizer and victim of the society that's pushed him and his family into desperate madness. As Massacre reaches its climax, there's a full-fledged insanity that permeates the film, and alongside it comes a sense of black comedy that becomes more and more apparent. As Sally is forced to be a guest at the family's dinner, Hooper's film manifests its family's madness into its sound design, shot composition, and editing rhythm. The screaming taunts, the lingering shots of repurposed flesh and bone, Hooper positioning the camera to place us in Sally's position at the head of the table in what Clover calls the audience-identifying eye camera, and a series of ever-shrinking, rapidly cut close-ups that take us right up to Sally's wild eyes, all let the insanity completely loose. But there's also something darkly funny that comes in the form of Grandpa, an ancient, desiccated old man we at first mistake for a corpse, and soon realize is alive. Being the patriarch and legendary slaughterer of the family, Grandpa is given the honor of killing Sally with a sledgehammer to the head. Of course, the old bag of bones is too damn weak to actually lift it, and after being the perpetrators of so much horror, this seemingly legendary man is the ultimate embodiment of emasculation. What is this family but a bunch of lunatics living out their own destructive form of capitalism in the middle of nowhere? There's no true future for them on this path. Grandpa's inability to kill Sally, and the family's unerring belief in his ability to do so, lets our final girl escape. Horror movies scare us because they tap into a fear that's already present within us, either on a primal or intellectual level, and draw it to the surface so that we must confront it. Done enough times and it becomes a cathartic collective ritual. In the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this fear can be applied and interpreted in many different ways. But its core terror comes from the idea that our social norms and boundaries of so-called human decency are simply a thin wallpaper slapped over the truth of voracious madness. That when it comes down to it, our society is built on consuming what we view as weak and lesser than ourselves to be strong and full, eating animals, taking advantage of the weak to profit, preying on tragedy to gain attention, deriving sexual thrills from the people we dehumanize. It's all part of an endlessly hungry world that inevitably eats its own. The fear is in wondering when our own time might come. Having come face to face with the screaming, insane, cannibalistic underbelly of the United States, Sally only escapes through sheer chance. In the aftermath, the dream of peace and love has been ground to bloody meat, but the monsters are still out there. What else is left but madness? Thanks for watching today's video. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is art. Disturbing, blood-covered, dang-ass freak art, but art nonetheless. And what I think is so fascinating about this film is its ability to disturb even all these years later. Even for people who have never seen it, its name still invokes a reaction. As a little behind-the-scenes peek here, I was originally going to cover this film for last Halloween's One Horrifying Moment, and specifically I was going to talk about the dinner scene. It was actually the motivation that I had behind doing that entire series. But after a little while, I realized I wanted to talk about Psycho for it. So if you've never seen that series, check out my Psycho video as well as all the awesome entries into the One Horrifying Moment playlist that are connected. I was really proud of what myself and a lot of other talented YouTubers were able to put together. But saving Texas Chainsaw Massacre for its own really in-depth video I think was worth the wait. So I hope that you enjoyed it and that you weren't eating a hamburger while you were watching. Because I was, actually, when I rewatched the film as research research for this video, and it wasn't the best experience. Let me know what you thought about the video and about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I guess the franchise, which is really actually sucks overall, in the comments below. As always, thank you to my patrons for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to all videos and exclusive audio-only reviews. I think somewhere around this video's publication I'll have a Patreon-only review of Army of the Dead, which is perfect to promote during this video. And I also hope that you're enjoying this bigger streak of horror-related content on the channel. As always, I hope that you're doing well, staying safe, and looking out for one another. I'll see you again soon.